Peace be upon you, friends. I am your friend Aram. This is my first video on the channel. Please support my channel by subscribing. In this channel, I list a group of novels, and this is the first part of one of the beautiful novels. Its streets had a distinct smell. On the first visit, I was not aware of our destination, but with repeated visits, I was eager to go because I liked those mud houses for some reason. We were waiting for the sheikh in a small room full of women and children, and we rarely saw a man among them. This waiting extended for long periods on our first visits before my mother realized the mechanism by which this place worked, which was money. We obtained VIP passes for every visit after my mother realized this mechanism. The money was flowing into the hands of everyone who would take us to the sheikh quickly, and in the end, after several customs points, I would not sit in front of him for more than 5 minutes, while my mother would quickly try to explain my condition with worry on her face as he closed his eyes, placing his hand on my head and muttering some words that were not clearly audible while I looked. He approached him with a mixture of fear and astonishment, and the meeting usually ended with him spitting in my face and a bottle of oil or water, and us leaving quickly and hastily, as if we were fleeing from a crime scene. My mother's visits to the sheikh continued, and the spitting sessions in my face continued until my mother suddenly stopped going to him. Honestly, I'm used to those visits that take me out of the house. I wasn't one of the kids who was allowed out, much so these therapy appointments were a nice change. After several weeks, our visits to the sheikh stopped, so I asked my mother, "Why don't we go to the sheikh anymore, Mother?" My mother responded with a response that I did not laugh at until years later, when I grew up and understood her words. She said with a sigh, "The police arrested him." I never imagined that my mother, who was educated and had visited more than 20 countries around the world, would end up taking her son to a man to spit in his face and pay him a handsome sum for it. This situation, when I recalled it in my memory one day, prompted me to think, and it raised a question in my moving mind. Why? Why did my mother do that? Why did I go to that charlatan who drowned me with his oils and spit? I could only find one answer. Fear. Yes, it is fear. Fear stripped her of her reason and logic and stripped her of all means of self-defense. Fear was that man's weapon to blackmail people of their money and sometimes their honor, and no one was able to discuss it because he was wearing a cloak that gave him all the powers and immunity he needed: religion. This topic remained in my mind until I was 20 years old. It became the center of my attention and preoccupied my mind. I began to observe the members of society around me and developed the theory of fear for measurement and experimentation more than once, and this theory never failed me. I tried to explain to people through logical discussion that the blind trust they place in some who wear the cloak of religion contradicts the instinct of caution and fear, which are among the basics of survival for them. But the influence of the beard, the short dress, and the smell of oud oil was stronger than me and my logic. However, I had hoped that I would achieve a change in the prevailing pattern of thinking towards the traditionalists. But when I reached the university stage, I discovered that my society suffers from a misunderstanding of the meaning of understanding. In other words, there is a prior evaluation of a person's mind before he opens his mouth, and a strengthening of his morals before he deals with you. I did not understand this system, and had never read about it in any book before. I adapted to my society by adhering to my concepts and principles, and I mastered ignoring those who chose to be ignorant. Some were criticizing my citing Einstein because he was Jewish and accusing me of stupidity because I admired Hitler's Nazi mentality. The imposed norm here was that everything outside the geographical borders of my country should only be dealt with contempt and regret. They are the lost and we are the survivors. Even my friendships with adherents of some other religions and people of different sects were viewed by some as a high betrayal of the organization that would enter heaven through its widest doors. I do not deny that I tried to adopt this thought at some point in my life as a way to adapt and experience new things, but I could not because the demands of my mind were greater. I was accused of heresy and contempt of religion more than once by a number of scholars, for reasons that were not religious at all. I then began to think until I came to my own conviction, which is that a fool is like being naked in front of people, and he will cover himself with anything and in any way in order to conceal his foolishness. There are those who choose silence, and I respect this type. And there are those who choose to attack your person so that people will turn to you and turn their attention away from his exposed private parts. And this is unfortunately, many of my community members are stupid. Some people confuse ignorance with stupidity and believe that ignorance is as reprehensible as stupidity. They do not realize that we are all ignorant of something in one way or another, and only God knows all knowledge. The word ignorant is an attribute of a lack of knowledge, but stupidity is an attribute of a lack of ability to absorb knowledge, and this is more dangerous. At that stage of my life, at the height of my mental thirst for knowledge, the course of my life changed forever. I did not tell anyone what happened to me, because I did not find an explanation for those events that any mind would accept in this time. To be clear from the beginning, I am not expecting acceptance or rejection from anyone, and I will narrate what I went through for the sake of chronological documentation. Perhaps one day after I die, what I wrote will be looked at in the same way as the writings of the one who first said that the earth was spherical were looked at, so he and his writings were burned and the truth did not emerge. Written only after many centuries, I ask for what I will mention in the following pages of events, stories, and novels that no one will believe, and I will not claim that they are true in order to protect myself from the lash of ignorant criticism, and I will also not say that it is a novel of my imagination in order to oppress an important part of my life that changed it forever, but I will suffice by saying that it is not just Israeli women. The day that changed my life, we were visiting a relative, and the council was crowded with men of all ages. As usual, I was discussing controversial topics warmly and clashing with any opinion that I did not like or that entered my mind. I loved to hear expressions of praise from those around me when I criticized one of the arrogant people who claimed knowledge, and knowledge in front of the members of the council, just because they have a social or economic status that makes them believe that they are authorized to speak in any field or topic. I was fed by the looks of pride and admiration from my father in particular, some of my relatives and the council members in general, and phrases such as, "You are ahead of your age," or "God willing, I have charred them," were the beloved crowning glory to my heart in every debate battle in which I won. There is no doubt that there are some fossilized minds that were nesting in those gatherings, like old crows that refuse and forbid small birds to sit on a weak branch of that tree and croak at anyone who tries to approach them, and that no matter how much you knock on them with the anvil of logic and the hammer of conclusive evidence, they will never break and admit their ignorance, but they are satisfied. With funny, provocative responses and phrases such as, "Thank God for the blessing of Islam," or "We only know the Quran and the Sunnah," as if the person speaking to them had just come from the Wailing Wall. I was accustomed to this outdated method of escaping dialogue and rational debate, but I was resentful of the looks of support and acceptance from some of those whom I considered to be among the rational people in the council, as if with this support they were buying their comfort and saving themselves from an inevitable classification that would isolate them from the group that controls our esteemed council and place them on a recognized list. In our present day, liberalism, And this name, unfortunately, has been used with those to whom it applies and with those to whom it does not apply, not to mention phrases such as, "Would you like it for your sister?" and other usual means of escaping any logical discussion. I am almost certain that some of you will stop reading now because a judgment has been issued against me that I despise those around me and view them as inferior, and I carry the torch of liberation and openness to lead people with it. Or at the very least, I am immoral or contemptuous of religions from just a few lines, even though I did not touch on religion at all, but I touched on people, and here lies. The real problem I face is with my mind that does not want to stop thinking. It is not in my nature to sanctify people or place them in the category of infallible people. The most they can get from me is mutual respect and uplifting discussion, and this in itself is an unattainable dream with some of us who are considered thinkers and rational people, and who they did not wander or rise beyond the simplest ABCs of dialogue literature. What you hear from me is not the voice of the ego, but rather the voice of who are you to determine how I am. Let us return to the council, which was filled with incense smoke, declaring the end of the session, and there was a look of anger from my uncle when I said that lighting incense is one of the most important components that Hindus use in many of their ceremonies and rituals. I must learn not to talk about constants in the future. We were about to leave, and before I reached the council door, one of my relatives, who was old and nearly 70 years old, called me. "Ra." He gestured to me with his hand, and I went to him because, frankly, I prefer talking to the elderly, because they contain ancient wisdom that I would like to imbibe from them before they leave this world. My elderly relative said to me, "Would you like to talk?" The question was strange, but the answer was definitely yes. He said, "Stay with me for a while until the people leave." I sat with him until the people left, including my father, whom my brother took with him in his car, which he had just started learning to drive, because the house was the house of the son of the man who asked to speak to me and had been staying with him for some time. The place was empty of people, and the man's son asked permission to go upstairs and said to me, "The place is yours. Take your time." I looked at my elderly relative with a look. "Give me what you have," and he surprised me with a question and said, "Do you believe in the other world?" I was surprised by his question and asked him the reason for the question in the first place. He said, "I heard you in the council discussing Abdul Rahman and saying, your attachment to superstitions is what made you think this way." So I said, "Yes, superstitions. We were discussing the story of that magician who came to read to that poor woman after he convinced her that she was possessed, and in the end, he harassed her. He asked me and said, 'What is the myth in this matter? Magic, reading, or what?' So I remained silent. It is rare for me to remain silent and hold my tongue due to my inability to respond. I told him, I meant other things. He said, "Like what?" So I was silent again as I stared into his eyes that were waiting for my answer, and I did not like the siege I was in, so I said without thinking, "The world of jinn, demons, and possession." These words in particular did not enter my mind.